And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is what I call my Morning Musings. I'm with you, generally speaking, 5 days a week. I have produced over 2,500 videos. They're free for you to watch. It is a vast storehouse of information. I have done studies on how to understand Bible prophecy. I have done special studies on the Olivet Discourse, which is where we're at right now. I've done special studies on the resurrection. And I've covered a lot of territory. So anyway, we're currently starting to wind down our study of the Olivet Discourse. We've been focused on Matthew 25:31 and following for several weeks now, and I've been demonstrating for you and with you how so many other passages, particularly in the Old Testament, serve as the source, serve as the fountain from which Matthew chapter 25:31 and following flows. Matthew chapter 25:31 and following is not a standalone prophecy. It is not an isolated prophecy. It's not a, quote, new prophecy in the sense that it was never predicted before. In fact, as I have demonstrated, Matthew chapter 25:31 and following is built squarely on the foundation of Joel chapter 2 and 3. And let's not forget this. Peter, in Acts chapter 2, quoted verbatim from Joel chapter 2, 28 and following, and applied it to his generation, applied it and said, this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. He did not say, well, what's happening here today is a foretaste of what will eventually happen in the last days. No, he did not say what you're seeing this day is a prediction of the last days. No, he quotes the prophecy from Joel of the last days, and he said, this is that which is spoken by the prophet Joel. You know, I've said this on many occasions. It literally flabbergasts me from time to time at the argumentum ad desperatum that are offered by futurists to avoid the force, the power of Peter's application of Joel 2 and 3. It literally is astounding. And it's not only astounding, it's sad. Preconceived ideas have the ability, if we allow them, to absolutely force us to reject, to deny, to ignore emphatic time statements and emphatic declarations of the fulfillment of prophecy. I have engaged with numerous individuals on the question whether or not Acts chapter 2 served as partial fulfillment of Joel 2 and 3. I've had people tell me flat out, Acts chapter 2 had nothing whatsoever to do with Joel. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who was a converted Jew, very notable in the dispensational world, said the events of Acts chapter 2 had virtually no relationship with Joel chapter 2. Well, how much clearer could Peter have been than what he said? This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, and he quotes from Joel. This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. So anyway, I have been sharing with you that among the passages that Matthew chapter 25:31 is built on, it's not just Joel 2 and 3, it's also Isaiah 2 through 4. It is in reality a host of Old Testament prophecies. I'm not going to take any more time to try to document that, but I do want to follow up on the theme found in Joel chapter 3, 20 and 21, that in the last days, at the day of the Lord, God would acquit the blood guilt of Jerusalem. That means he was going to judge the guilty, those who were guilty of shedding innocent blood. He wasn't going to let them off, so to speak. He was going to judge them. He was going to hold them accountable. So I've shared with you Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 that are set in the exact identical temporal framework in the last days, great and terrible day of the Lord. And I pointed out with you and for you how Isaiah chapters 2 through 4 is emphatically about the first century and Jesus' generation. But you see, both Joel and Isaiah are actually built upon a prophecy that was given much, much earlier. And that is Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 43. Now, in order to understand and in order to appreciate and in order to catch the power of Deuteronomy 32, here's what we have to do. Let's go back to the prelude to chapter 32, which is Deuteronomy 31, verse 29. Moses said, I know that after my death, you, speaking of the nation, shall become utterly corrupt. Now, that terminology of becoming utterly corrupt means you're going to fill up the measure of your sin. Now, make no mistake, the 10 northern tribes filled up the measure of their sin and were destroyed in 721 BC. The 2 southern tribes filled up the measure of their sin and were destroyed in the Babylonian captivity of 586 BC. In the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, Jerusalem and Judea became corrupt again. And according to Daniel chapter 8, 23 and following, they filled up the measure of their transgressions. But then you have Jesus in Matthew chapter 23 standing in the temple saying, you bear witness to yourselves that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. Because you say, if we had been alive in the days of our fathers, we would not have slain the prophets. And you thereby bear witness that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you adorn the sepulchres of the prophets, all the while bearing witness that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Jesus was saying that while Israel, 10 tribes, filled up the measure of their sin and were destroyed in 721, even though Judah filled up the measure of their sin and were destroyed in 586, even though there was another filling up of the measure of sin in the time of Antiochus. Now, notice that Jesus said, fill up the measure of your father's guilt. This is not just about that generation. This is about the preceding generations. Somehow, some way, don't ask me to explain it, it's all simply found in the words of God. God was saying, all of the righteous blood of all of the righteous shed on the earth from righteous Abel unto Zechariah, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar, will be required of this generation. How far back did that go? To Abel, Cain and Abel. That means it included the sins of the fathers in killing the innocent in the 8th century BC. It included the guilt that evidently wasn't fully atoned through punishment and judgment. in the 6th century BC, nor in the 2nd century BC. So, Deuteronomy chapter 31 and 29 is predicting the time in the last days in which Israel would become utterly corrupt. And evil shall befall you in those days, Deuteronomy says. Moses said. Okay. Jesus, 2,000 years ago, appeared in the last days. Jesus, appearing in the last days 2,000 years ago, said that Jerusalem and Judea of his generation was going to fill up the measure of their father's guilt, fill up the measure of all of the guilt all the way back to creation. And you know, it's really, really sad to me. There are former preterists who now literally scoff at Jesus' words. Say it's crazy to even think about all of the blood of all the righteous being avenged in AD 70. That's just crazy. So I guess Jesus was just crazy, according to these people. Do you see how desperate people get? Argumentum ad desperatum. So here's the prophecy of the last days, the prophecy of the last days in which Israel would fill up the measure of their sin. Here's Jesus saying Israel would fill up the measure of their sin. Now watch, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, 15 and 16, 14 to 16 actually. Paul commends the Thessalonians for their patience in their suffering. And he said, you became companions of your brethren in Judea, who were also persecuted as you are. And he speaks of the Jews. And he says, they have both killed the prophets, they have crucified the Lord, they do now persecute the apostles and prophets of Jesus, and they do fill up the measure of their sin always. And the wrath of God has come upon them to the uttermost. The picture, the word picture in the Greek is that here's a humongous boulder tottering at the edge of a cliff, of a bluff, just sitting there trembling, ready to fall and to crush and to destroy. So, Deuteronomy said in the last days, Israel would fill up the measure of their sin. Jesus said, in his generation, all of the blood of all of the righteous, all the way back to creation, would be required of his generation. Paul, speaking of the Jews, and of course Paul was writing in the last days, speaking of the Jews, said they were at that very time, by killing Jesus' apostles and prophets, having slain the prophets, having slain Jesus, and now killing Jesus' apostles and prophets, they were filling up the measure of their sin, and judgment was about to fall, just like Jesus said in Matthew 23, verily I say unto you, all of these things will come upon this generation. And it did. Now listen, if you want a fantastic study on the avenging of the martyrs, as I suggested yesterday, go to my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. Look up Sam Dawson's The Avenging of the Blood. Forgot the exact title, and I apologize for that. But I can tell you this. I may have forgotten the exact title, but it is an awesome book. You really, really need this in your library. So order the book, make mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping, and that'll save you $5. Okay, we're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 32 tomorrow on the flip side. So I'll see you there.